I spent 4 years working 3 jobs to pay for my girlfriend's tuition while we attended the same university. I thought graduation would be our beginning, but the moment she held her degree, she vanished. The day after we walked the stage, she sent a cold breakup text. She wanted a man with a real future in the city, not a pathetic island boy with nothing but a bucket. Hideous and broke, I crawled back to my decaying hometown, expecting a life of obscurity, until a translucent blue screen flickered in my vision. System initializing. 115 feet infinite C-scan activated. Now, while my ex grovels as a corporate slave for a meager paycheck, my digital sonar makes the murky ocean as clear as glass. I'm pulling $3,000 worth of rare zebra shrimp out of the mud before my morning coffee is even cold. She wanted a man with a future? Fine. I'll build a coastal empire while she watches from the sidelines. Who's the one with no future now? Before I continue my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly means a lot to me. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Now, let me take you back to what happened a few hours earlier. After transferring from a long-distance bus to a medium-sized one, and finally to a rural urban public line, I thought I was home free. But just as I was about to board the ship, the universe had other plans, and all sailings were suspended due to strong gusts at sea. I spent 2 days waiting at the pier before I finally caught the ferry to Jawa Island. As a child, I never liked boats. When the sea was calm, it was fine, but even a slight wind made the journey incredibly bumpy. Having grown up on the island, I had suffered through seasickness more times than I could count, which even led to some teasing from the local islanders. Now, however, things felt different. Not only did I feel perfectly fine, but I actually found the salty scent of the sea breeze quite comfortable. 3 hours later, I finally stepped foot in Shajang village. The aunties I encountered along the way greeted me with the warmth typical of island life, and I responded with equal enthusiasm. As I walked, however, I couldn't help but notice that the village seemed to be inhabited only by the elderly and children running through the streets. Jawai Island is a far cry from the mainland, and while life there has become increasingly prosperous, many of the villagers here still live very difficult lives. Most of the young people have left to find work, leaving very few people my age behind. It left me with an indescribable feeling in my heart. When I stepped through the door of my childhood home, it felt like stepping into a time capsule. Before me sat a black and white television, a tape recorder longer than my arm, and a pull-string radio mounted on the wall. Even the windows were the old wooden frame style that you have to push outwards. To an outsider, it might look like I had traveled back to the 1980s. This island has always been isolated and far behind the development of the cities, and because my family's financial situation was poor, we never updated much. My sister married early and I went away to university, so many of our things remained exactly as they were years ago. I headed to my room, where 2 old celebrity posters were still pasted on the wall. I tore them down and checked the cabinet for my mattress pad and quilt. I braced myself for a musty smell, but when I pulled them out, I was greeted instead by the fresh scent of the sun. It made me wonder if my sister had been coming by to air them out for me. Considering how spotless the table and chairs in the living room were, she must have been looking after the house regularly. Our parents passed away long ago, so for years it has just been the 2 of us relying on each other. My sister even covered a large portion of my first-year university tuition. Throughout the following years, she constantly tried to give me living expenses. I always refused, but she would force the money on me anyway. I've owed her so much over the years that I often wonder when I'll finally be able to repay her. My stomach let out a low rumble, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything since a single tea egg this morning. In a place like this, supermarkets and wet markets don't exist. We're lucky to have a small convenience store. I walked over to the village shop and picked up a packet of instant noodles, some eggs, and sausages. Since we don't have an electric kettle, I had to do things the old-fashioned way. I started a fire and put the noodles into the pot, cracking in 2 eggs and adding the sausages. Next to my firewood stove, there is a palm-sized hole where I scooped water to cook the noodles. By the time the meal was ready, the water in the hole had boiled as well, so I poured it into a thermos for drinking. It had been a long time since I'd handled a stove like this, and by the time I set the steaming noodles on the table, I was covered in sweat. Right at that moment, the door opened and Jiang Feng walked in. We both jumped, startled by the other's presence, and asked why the other was there at the exact same time. I dragged a chair over for her to sit and then pulled out my graduation certificate to show her. I told her simply that I had graduated. She looked at the certificate with immense delight, her eyes lingering on the name of Nanchung University. It's highly ranked nationwide, and I could tell she felt I was truly promising. However, her joy froze as a thought seemed to strike her. I knew what she was going to ask, so I decided to be direct and told her about what happened with Ye Tian. I explained that she had gotten into graduate school and broke up with me. My sister looked like she had 1,000 words stuck in her throat. She knew that Ye Tian and I grew up together in this village as childhood sweethearts, and that both our families struggled. She also knew that a large portion of Ye Tian's living expenses during university had come from the money I earned working part-time. She clearly hadn't expected her to turn her back on me the moment she moved on to graduate studies. She watched my face carefully, but fortunately, I managed to keep a calm expression. She tried to encourage me, telling me that since I was now an educated university graduate, there was nothing I couldn't achieve. I sighed and asked her if she remembered the major I had applied for. She answered immediately, saying it was financial management. To her, it sounded impressive, and the villagers had told her that graduates in that field become leaders at large companies. I had to be honest with her, explaining that while the major is indeed impressive, it's usually meant for those from families who already own factories or companies to manage. When she anxiously asked what I planned to do next, I told her I intended to stay here for a few days to clear my head. By staying in my hometown, I wouldn't have to worry about the heavy burden of monthly rent. She told me to stay with peace of mind and to let her know if I needed anything. I assured her I could take care of myself, which seemed to relieve her. She noted that I had truly grown up and remarked that our parents would be happy to see me like this. She invited me to her house for dinner tonight, but I paused and told her I didn't think I would go. She has helped me too much already. I know my brother-in-law has his own thoughts about her being so supportive of me, and their own financial situation isn't great with 2 daughters to raise. I didn't want to be an extra burden when their lives are already tight. I only regretted that I didn't have the ability to help her yet. My sister didn't seem to realize my internal conflict. She searched her pockets but didn't find any money, explaining that she had only come by today to close the upstairs window she'd opened for ventilation earlier. When I declined dinner again, she gave in, jokingly assuming my laziness had struck and that I just didn't want to make the 10-minute walk between our villages. She told me that next time she came over, she'd bring some things and cook me a proper meal. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before she headed home to her children. After she left, I slowly finished my noodles. Feeling a bit restless sitting alone, I decided to go for a walk. The sun was quite strong, so I grabbed the straw dongpo hat hanging on the door. It's standard gear on the island for sun and rain, yet most people here still end up several shades darker than those on the mainland. My own skin isn't fair, but I'm tall and fit, and the tan just makes me look more energetic. Even in a crowd of handsome guys, I've always been told I stand out. I walked until I reached the edge of the sea, the rhythmic sound of the waves pulling me toward the shoreline. Most people from the inland imagine golden sands and crystal clear blue water when they think of the coast, but the reality is often far less picturesque. Many stretches of coastline don't have beaches at all. Where I stood now was a vast mudflat, an expanse of black stretching out toward the horizon. As a child, I loved rolling around in these mudflats, though it usually earned me a beating from my sister whenever I returned home caked in grime. Watching the seawater recede, I was surprised to see the tide going out at this time of day. Uncle Luo happened to walk by with his teacup and noticed my gaze, casually mentioning that I shouldn't bother looking because it was only a small tide. During a big low tide, the sea level drops significantly and offers a bounty for foraging, but a small tide like this usually yielded very little. I wasn't particularly interested in the tides, since I hadn't come here to forage, but my attention was caught by 2 little brats busy on the mudflat. One was digging with a shovel, while the other raked with an iron rake. They had brought an impressive array of tools, yet they hadn't managed to dig up much of anything. I couldn't help but let out a short laugh at the sight. The 2 children stopped abruptly, looking up at me with expressions that suggested they felt humiliated. When they asked what I was laughing at, I wondered aloud whose children they were, noting that outsiders never visit a place as remote as Jawa Island. The first boy identified his father as Wang Fa, and the second said his father was Li To. I was genuinely surprised to hear those names. Their fathers were neighbors who lived right next to each other and were only a few years older than me. I hadn't expected their children to be this old already. They warned me not to think I could scare them just because I knew their fathers, adding that their parents were out working and wouldn't be seen. It was a familiar story. They were left behind children. Most of the kids remaining in the village were in the same situation, because it was inconvenient for parents to bring them along for work, so they left them with the elderly at home. Truth be told, they were all quite pitiful. When I glanced toward their buckets, they immediately became defensive and guarded their meager catch, asking if a big person like me was planning to rob them. I was momentarily speechless. Did I really look that menacing? Besides, I didn't care for the few things they had managed to find. But suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over me, accompanied by a surge of nausea that made me feel like I was about to vomit. As quickly as the feeling appeared, it vanished. I blinked, realizing my eyesight had improved significantly. After years of studying through university, my vision had suffered even without glasses, but now everything appeared incredibly sharp and clear. Suddenly, a voice echoed in my mind, informing me that the infinite scanning system was awakening now that I was facing the sea, and asking if I would like to load it. I didn't spend much time overthinking it. If this was a cheat, I was taking it. I chose to load the system immediately. A moment later, I looked out at the mudflat again and was stunned. I could actually see beneath the surface. While the top of the mud looked empty, underneath were all sorts of shellfish and, to my surprise, quite a few mantis shrimp. My scanning range was limited to about 10 meters, but as I tried running along the shore, the visual range moved with me. Watching the mantis shrimp beneath the mud, I couldn't help but swallow hard. I started thinking of all the ways I could cook them, wondering if I was about to get rich. Back in university, I never ate seafood because it was simply too expensive, but that was about to change. Wang Xiaobao and Li Xiaoyo watched me with growing fear as my face shifted from pale to green and then to red. My inexplicable running back and forth seemed to frighten them, and they asked if I was okay or if I was planning to extort money from their grandparents. I was still immersed in the joy of binding the system, but their words quickly brought me back to reality. I was a bit displeased that they were already calling me uncle, and I assured them I had no intention of extorting children. I looked at their buckets again, noting that the few mud snails and hermit crabs they had found could easily fit into a single container. I thought about asking to borrow a bucket, but seeing how they protected their property, I decided against it. I couldn't make 2 children cry on my first day back. I was originally too lazy to make the trek, but now I had no choice but to head home and grab a bucket of my own. I found an old eel clamp in the house. The metal was rusted and the screw was stiff, but it would suffice. I tossed it into a bucket and headed back to the shore. The 2 children were still there, watching me vigilantly as if they still feared I was after their hermit crabs. To put them at ease, I deliberately stayed a distance away. I took off my shoes and rolled up my pants, stepping carefully onto the mud to avoid any sharp cowrie shells. The kids had wading boots, but I had to make do. I scooped some seawater into my bucket to keep my future catch alive. Wang Xiaobao scratched his head and reminded me that his grandma said there was nothing to find during a small tide. He clearly thought I wasn't very smart and that my efforts would be in vain since no other adults were out foraging today. I just chuckled as I waded through the muddy water, telling them that today I would open their eyes to what could be found. They rolled their eyes, telling me to keep bragging, and Wang Xiaobao joked that he might as well say he could dig up mantis shrimp. He had actually hit the nail on the head. I told them I'd do exactly that, which only made them laugh harder. Using my perspective ability, I moved toward a specific mantis shrimp nest I had spotted. Most areas only had 1 or 2, but this specific spot was a jackpot. Seeing me stop, the children grew curious and walked over with their buckets. I dug away the top layer of mud to reveal a large air hole, causing their eyes to widen. In our local lore, a big hole meant a big catch. They suddenly looked a bit envious of my luck. Wang Xiaobao guessed it was a razor clam king, while Li Xiaoya argued it must be a mud crab because the hole was too large for a clam. They started arguing right in my ear until I asked them what they would think if it turned out to be a zebra mantis shrimp. They were stunned into silence. Wang Xiaobao eventually accused me of trying to fool them, and Li Xiaoya pointed out that we didn't even have zebra mantis shrimp around here. There are differences between the islands. Some have crabs or sea cucumbers, but ours is mostly shellfish. Common mantis shrimp are found occasionally, but zebra mantis shrimp are rare and usually fetch a high price, anywhere from 2 to 300 yuan per jin. Since it was July and the fishing ban was in effect, wild seafood like that would be worth a fortune. Ordinary wild mantis shrimp could usually sell for over 100 yuan per pound, but a rare variety like the zebra mantis shrimp would easily exceed 300. Wang Xiaobao and Li Xiaoya were convinced that whatever was hiding under this particular air hole couldn't be a zebra mantis shrimp, yet their curiosity kept them rooted to the spot. This mudflat often revealed plenty of razor clams during low tide, but ordinary ones never left air holes this massive. Even a razor clam king wouldn't typically have an opening of this size, and Wang Xiaobao found himself staring at it with growing fascination. I was feeling a bit troubled at this point because this mantis shrimp was buried quite deep. The tongs I had brought from home simply couldn't open wide enough to navigate the air hole, so I turned my gaze to the shovel in Li Xiaoye's hand. I asked him if I could use his shovel for a bit, and though he seemed a bit reluctant at first, he eventually hesitated and handed it over to me. I took the shovel and began scraping away most of the mud, even unearthing 2 cat's eye snails in the process. I squeezed the water out of them and tossed one directly into each of the 2 little brats' buckets. The 2 of them were instantly touched. They had clearly pegged me as a bad guy, but now I was giving them snails. I suppose if they had squeezed the water out themselves, the way it shoots out like a water gun would have been great fun for them. I shoveled a few more times and stopped when there were about 12 inches of mud left, fearing that if I went any further, the mantis shrimp would escape. After all, seeing a catch and actually securing it are 2 very different things. Through my scan, I discovered that the burrow was U-shaped, which meant there was another connected opening nearby. Seeing the mantis shrimp about to bolt for the other side, I stopped caring about the mess, rolled up my sleeve, and reached my arm deep into the hole. Wang Xiaobao was so terrified that he actually covered his eyes, wondering how I dared to do such a thing. He likely imagined that if a large crab were down there, its claws would surely pinch my fingers, and he seemed to feel the phantom pain just thinking about it. I didn't know how much time had passed, but the scream he expected never came. When he moved his hands and secretly opened his eyes a crack, he saw me calmly pulling my arm out of the hole. For a moment, he thought the hole was empty and was ready to mock me for being weak, but then he saw the mantis shrimp clutched firmly in my hand. I tossed the creature into my own bucket, and Li Xiaoya let out a loud exclamation, recognizing that it really was a zebra mantis shrimp. It was quite large and covered in distinct zebra stripes. Anyone living by the sea knows that with seafood, The bigger the size, the higher the value. Looking at this one, it clearly weighed at least 9 or 10 ounces. Li Xiaoya's observational skills were much better than Xiao Bao's, and he quickly pointed out that this mantis shrimp even had roe. Through the translucent shell, Wen Xiaobao could see the orange-red color inside, confirming the presence of roe, which made it even more valuable. Although it wasn't completely filled, it was still a very rare find. Xiaobao took a sharp breath, clearly wishing he had been the one to find it. He estimated that this single shrimp could sell for 200 or 300 yuan, which was enough to buy a mountain of toys at the convenience store. I looked up at the two of them and asked what they thought, but they just exchanged glances, seemingly feeling that my gaze was full of mockery. Perhaps because of that, they suddenly picked up their buckets and ran away. I was left speechless, feeling like I had been cast as some kind of big bad guy. To be honest, I had been quite nervous myself. I never considered my luck to be that great, and I hadn't expected a miracle like this system to actually happen to me. Even though I had seen what was beneath the mud, a part of me suspected it was just an illusion. Now, seeing the live, roe-filled zebra mantis shrimp in my bucket, most of my worries finally settled. Since I could see there were other zebra mantis shrimp here, I picked up the iron shovel Li Xiaoya had left behind and continued to scrape away the mud. The air holes that were previously hidden on the surface became clearly visible. Since my hands were already filthy, I simply reached into one hole after another to dig them out. Mantis shrimp have thorns on both sides that can prick you if you don't grip them properly. But thanks to the powerful scanning function, I was able to cleverly avoid the rows of thorns every time I grabbed one. Aside from that first one, the others were also zebra-striped, though some were smaller, weighing perhaps 3 or 4 ounces. I didn't bother digging out the even smaller ones. Most fishermen throw back the small fry because their economic value is low, and there isn't much meat. But also because people are watching and you shouldn't be too ruthless. We live off the sea and face natural disasters constantly, so people here tend to believe in mysterious powers more than inlanders. For me, it was simply a matter of not wanting to be too extreme. I started walking across the mudflat again, realizing that while this golden finger was excellent, it was certainly tiring on the legs. I found myself wishing I could see the entire mudflat at a single glance. Just then, my steps stopped. More zebra mantis shrimp were ahead. Not many, but they were incredibly large. I realized I was truly going to get rich today. Just like before, I reached in and dug them out. One of them actually weighed over a pound. For a zebra mantis shrimp over a pound, the unit price doubles. The only real drawback was that these didn't have roe, but even so, it was a full harvest. I also caught a few ordinary large mantis shrimp, but chose to let the ones hidden deep go, as digging those deep holes was becoming exhausting. When I spotted some mud snails, I hesitated for a second before shoveling them all into my bucket. Their price wasn't as high as the shrimp, but I loved to eat them, and they were all gathered together on the surface, requiring very little effort to pick up. I realized my system had another advantage. Even things on the surface were clearer to me than to others. The mudflat was dark and covered in water, so most people wouldn't even notice the snails unless they looked very closely. But within my 10-meter visual range, the mud appeared translucent, making it easy to spot the seafood. When I lifted the bucket, I found it had become quite heavy. Seeing that it was getting dark and the tide was about to come in, I carried the bucket to a watery area to wash the mud off my feet, then headed off the mudflat carrying my shoes. It had been 2:30 p.m. when I ate lunch, and by the time my sister's visit ended and I finished eating, it was already past 3 p.m. The village people usually ate dinner early, so while I was delayed at the sea, the aunts and elders had already started their evening strolls to aid digestion. Seeing me walking barefoot from the seaside, a group gathered around. They knew a small tide didn't usually offer much, but they were too idle not to be curious. Bucktooth Aunt smiled at me and asked if I found any good stuff. She likely thought that as a university student I couldn't tell the difference between green onions and chives, let alone dig for clams. She asked only casually, but I simply nodded and told her that I had. The people around were stunned, wondering if I had found anything better than just a few mussels. Mussels were so common here that we often had to dry them into dankai, and many of us were sick of the sight of them. Since the group was older and their eyesight wasn't the best, they initially only saw a dark mass in the bucket, but when they finally saw what was inside, they all gasped. Bucktooth Aunt and Jinju Aunt were so surprised they actually bumped their heads together. They couldn't believe there were mantis shrimp during a small tide, especially zebra mantis shrimp. They started exclaiming that I was going to be rich, especially when they noticed the one with the red roe. With the fishing season currently closed, wild seafood was in high demand. Ordinary mantis shrimp could sell for over 100 yuan a pound, but zebra mantis shrimp were so rare that the price was uncertain, likely at least 200 or even over 300 if one were bold. My bucket looked to have about 11 pounds of content. Even mixed with ordinary shrimp and snails, they estimated it was worth over 1,000 yuan. One villager remarked that I had been out for less than 2 hours and earned several days' wages, though another quickly pointed out that in our small village, that was a lot more than just a few days' pay. The crowd went silent for a moment, perhaps reflecting on why people said there was no future in a fishing village. I just smiled and told them I had happened to get lucky, which seemed to make them feel more at ease. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pack of Luchun cigarettes. I rarely smoked. I had bought this pack on the day I broke up with Ye Tian, but I only had one before deciding I shouldn't be decadent over a woman like her. I lit one for old Zhang and asked him if Uncle Irmo's family was still buying seafood. Old Zhang straightened his back, clearly pleased that a university student like me was asking for his advice. He confirmed that they were still buying and that I could sell my catch there. A large procession then followed me all the way to Jiang Ermao's doorstep, all of them curious to see the final price. Jiang Ermao was startled by the crowd but eventually spotted me in the center. We share the same surname, but we aren't related. He asked why a university graduate like me was back to digging for clams, especially since it was a small tide. When he looked into my bucket, he nearly jumped. He shouted out in surprise at the zebra mantis shrimp, and I just gave him a calm nod. He seemed to think university graduates were just different, finding such a haul and staying so nonchalant. He examined the shrimp, noting they were very fresh and wild. Several were around 3.5 ounces, while others varied. He estimated there were 5 weighing over half a pound, and even the smallest had roe. He began to weigh the largest ones individually. The first was 10.4 ounces, the second was 11.1 ounces, the third was 16.3 ounces, and the fourth was 15.3 ounces. The absolute largest one was actually 1.3 pounds. Jiang Ermo gasped, noting that these 5 were top grade and could be sold individually. He told me that since we were from the same village, he'd give me a fair price and offered 1,500 yuan for the whole bucket. The villagers were stunned, having expected 1,000, but not 1,500. They cheered that I was too lucky catching over 1,000 yuan worth of seafood during a small tide, and remarked that university students really were built differently. I kept my face expressionless. The villagers knew the prices of common catch, but they didn't know the true value of these rarer items. I was entirely sure of the exact value of my catch, so I had taken a moment to check the current market prices while I was still down on the beach. Based on what I saw, a zebra mantis shrimp weighing over half a pound, even the smallest one, could sell for 300 yuan because it was carrying roe. The one weighing roughly 10 ounces could easily bring in 200 yuan, while the specimen at nearly 15 ounces would likely fetch around 300. The largest one, coming in at over 16 ounces, was worth more than 500 yuan on its own. Just those 4 would total 1,300 yuan. Then there was the one weighing 0.66 pounds, which could easily go for 200, and the one close to a pound that should fetch around 300. The 1.01 pound specimen would sell for over 500, which felt acceptable to me. That alone brought the subtotal to 1,300 yuan. As for the monster weighing over 1.1 pounds, its sheer mass meant the unit price would double, allowing it to sell for over 1,000 yuan all by itself. The other smaller mantis shrimp could likely bring in another 300 to 400 yuan, and the ordinary mantis shrimp I had caught were all quite large, adding roughly 300 yuan to the pile. By my calculations, the total value of everything in my bucket was nearly 3,000 yuan. Of course, I realized the prices I found online were retail. The acquisition price a local collector offered would never be calculated that way. Still, no matter how I crunched the numbers, my goods were worth at least 2,200 to 2,300 yuan. Jiang Ermo had been careful to weigh every zebra mantis shrimp over a pound separately, so it was clear to me that he knew their value was on a different level than the smaller ones. I looked at him and asked if he could raise his price a bit more, addressing him as Uncle Ermo. Since he was a generation older than me, I made sure not to speak too directly in front of the other villagers. Aunt Lee's face paled as she heard my request, asking if all college students were this greedy and insisting that 1,500 yuan was more than enough. Jinju Shen chimed in as well, pointing out that 1,500 was as much as her husband earned from half a month of hard labor. I knew the people of my village well. They were simple, honest, and always ready to lend a hand if someone was in trouble. However, when everyone is struggling, seeing one person suddenly become well off can spark envy. It felt as if my desire for a fair price was like cutting into their own flesh. Jiang Ermao hesitated for a moment before offering to add another 50 yuan since I was a junior. My mouth twitched at that. If it was just for 50 yuan, I really couldn't be bothered to bargain with him. I told him that since I was capable of getting into a key university, my luck should be pretty good, and since beachcombing is all about luck, he should give me a reasonable price. I promised that if he did, I would bring my future hauls back to him. He looked impatient and stated that 1,600 was his final offer. In Shajiang village, he was the only one collecting seafood. He likely assumed I would only be in town for a few days and didn't believe I would actually return with more goods. Since the sea had been closed for months and the other villagers had been coming up empty, he clearly wanted to make a killing on my catch before it died, knowing the price of dead seafood dropped significantly. I just smiled at him and mentioned that I remembered a man named Wang from my sister's village, who also collects goods. I suggested that I could ask my sister to help me sell these things, noting that she and my brother-in-law had helped when Wang's family built their house, so he would surely give her a good price. Naturally, I wouldn't actually trouble my sister like that, or ask her to use her connections for me. I didn't even know if they had actually helped Wang build his house. I just said it casually to see his reaction. Since I didn't know, Zhang Mao certainly didn't either. His face turned pale. Jiaohua Island has 18 large villages, and almost everyone has its own collector. Usually, they don't buy from outsiders to avoid starting fights, but if I gave my goods to my sister to sell in her own village, it wouldn't be breaking any rules. He also knew that Wang's collection prices were higher than his own, and if my sister had a personal connection, the price would be even better. Seeing me turn to leave with the bucket, Zhang Mao became truly anxious. He glanced at the surrounding villagers, then pulled me into his house and shut the door. His home was renovated and much nicer than my old place. I asked him what he was doing, and he made a shushing gesture reminding me of how the villagers were. He offered me 2,000 yuan on the spot, provided I didn't tell anyone else so they wouldn't complain about his usual prices. When I just smiled at him again, he grew flustered and jumped to 2,300. I stayed silent, maintaining my smile, until he finally gritted his teeth and offered 2,500 yuan as his absolute limit. I agreed readily as the price was even higher than I had expected. Jiang Mao looked like he was dying of regret for blurting out such a high number, but he quickly tried to justify it to himself. Even if he earned less, at least he wouldn't lose money, and more importantly, he wouldn't let Wang from the neighboring village get the bargain. I happily set the water bucket down and finished the deal. When I walked back outside, the villagers crowded around to ask how much I sold it for. I just smiled brightly and told them they could ask Uncle Mao themselves before I walked away. Jiang Mao looked bitter. He had probably read online that college students were naive hothouse flowers, but he had found me to be a master of the trade. I didn't bother selling the mud snails as they were only worth 10 or 20 yuan, so I kept them for myself. I didn't care for them stir-fried, so I decided to pickle them with salt instead. Suddenly, a notification sounded in my head, informing me that the zebra mantis shrimp had been sold, and I had gained 2,500 system points. The system asked if I wanted to exchange those points to increase my scanning range by 5 meters. I was surprised to see the range could be increased, but I realized 2,500 was the exact amount of money I had just made. I worried that exchanging the points would make my hard-earned cash disappear, so I told the system I wouldn't exchange. To my annoyance, the system declared my selection invalid and began exchanging the space anyway. The exchange was successful, my current points dropped to 0, and my scanning range was increased to 15 meters. I wanted to curse. I had thought the system was polite for asking my opinion, but it turned out the question was meaningless. I quickly checked my bank balance on my phone and felt a wave of relief when I saw the 2,500 yuan was still there. This meant the system points were separate from my real-world money. I asked the system how much it would cost to increase the range next time, but there was no response. I asked again, specifically wanting to know the point requirement. Finally, the system replied, stating that I would need another 2,500 points to increase the range by the next 5 meters. The logic of the system became clear to me. For every 2,500 yuan I earned, I would gain 2,500 system points, which could then be traded for 5 meters of scanning range. If I managed to earn 25,000 yuan, I could extend my vision by 50 meters. My confidence soared at the thought. It seemed that building a life in my hometown wouldn't be as difficult as I had feared. After finishing a casual dinner, I decided to take a stroll to aid my digestion and pick up some much-needed supplies. My family still relied on a wood-burning stove, but for a man like me, the effort of starting a fire every time I wanted to eat was simply too much trouble. I planned to buy an induction cooker or an electric pot instead. I also needed to replace my clam digging tools, as the ones at home were years old and long overdue for retirement. As soon as I stepped outside, a familiar voice called out to me. Zhang Haidai, his head completely shaved, came running toward me at full speed. I was momentarily stunned, having not seen him in many years. He had gotten into serious trouble back when we were in our second year of high school. He and a few others had been involved in a group fight by the sea, which ended with one person paralyzed after their head was cracked open. It was a chaotic mess, and since no one could prove who had delivered the blow, the other families used their influence to protect their children. Only Haidai's parents, who didn't care for him at all, left him to face the consequences alone. Growing up together, I couldn't stand the thought of him being ruined. I had no money and no connections, but I managed to find a rookie lawyer online who had just received his license. I gave that lawyer every cent of the 800 yuan I had saved from years of New Year's money, hoping for a miracle. However, Haidai's parents betrayed him. They took money from the other families and convinced him to take the fall for everything. I visited him back then, pleading with him not to do anything so foolish, but he just gave me a vacant smile and told me that since he couldn't earn money for them anyway, it was fine if they could get paid this way. I felt nothing but frustration, yet I didn't give up. While balancing a heavy academic load, I spent my nights poring over legal documents alongside the rookie lawyer. Our continuous analysis eventually paid off. The 12-year sentence he was facing was reduced to 8 years. It had only been 5 years since he went in. Haidai approached me, explaining that he had behaved well and was released early. I pulled him into a tight hug and patted his bald head, telling him it was good that he was out. Then, without warning, I raised my leg and kicked him in the stomach. He looked at me with an innocent, confused expression, asking why I'd kicked him. I told him I was doing it to make him remember, and asked if he really didn't care about his own future. He rubbed his head and admitted he thought I was angry about something else, questioning what kind of future a person like him could even have. Seeing that I was still upset, he leaned closer and explained that while his parents never cared for him, they still raised him. He felt that serving those 5 years in prison was his way of repaying the kindness of his upbringing. Now the only person he felt he truly owed was me. I looked at him and realized the kid wasn't completely beyond help, so I tossed him a cigarette. He lit it quickly, taking a puff and remarking that he really liked this brand. In 5 years, his parents hadn't visited him once. Only I had made the trip every few months. We stood there in the corner smoking together. My current refined appearance is a bit of a mask. I was involved in plenty of mischief when I was younger. The difference was that I could do well on exams without much effort, while Heidai's grades were always at the bottom. Suddenly, he pulled out 450 yuan and stuffed it into my hand, mentioning that he heard from the villagers I was coming back to the village to develop and wanted me to have it. Before I could refuse, he jammed the money into my palm and ran off. Bucktooth Ant happened to see the whole thing and remarked that Heidai's brain was acting up again, noting that he had just borrowed 500 yuan from his uncle only to give me 450 of it. I stood there, stunned by the kid's loyalty. I walked toward his house and found him on the phone at his doorstep. I heard him agreeing to another group fight, arguing that 2 packs of cigarettes wouldn't be enough, and demanding a whole carton of Lucun because I liked them. I didn't wait for him to finish. I kicked him right then. He turned around, rubbing his waist, but his grimace turned into a happy smile the moment he saw it was me. I asked him if he ever learned from his mistakes or if he had forgotten how he ended up in prison in the first place. He knew I had overheard the call and rubbed his bald head, clearly reluctant to fight but desperate to do something for me. Fighting was the only skill people ever asked of him. He glanced at me cautiously, appearing genuinely afraid that I would be disappointed in him. I wanted to kick him again, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. There is always a pitiable side to a person others might hate. His name was supposed to mean to bring, but a registration error had changed it to its current form. He was born 12 years after his older brother, a surprise pregnancy his mother hadn't even realized until the day before he was born. She was a large woman and mistook her lack of a cycle for menopause. On the night he was born, his father was supposed to clean the captain's boat but was too lazy and sent his pregnant wife instead. She gave birth right there on the vessel. The captain was furious, believing a woman giving birth on his boat would bring a lifetime of bad luck, and he fired Heidai's father on the spot. Combined with the heavy fines from family planning policies at the time, his parents blamed him for every misfortune they faced, calling him a curse and beating him constantly. It was no wonder he grew into a troublemaker. I tried to return the 450 yuan, but he refused, insisting he had money. When I pressed him on exactly how much he had, he proudly declared that he still had 50 yuan, as if it were a fortune. I was both amused and exasperated. I asked him if he thought he was more capable than me, or if he believed I had fallen so low that I needed his help. I spoke bluntly, but he wasn't angry. He just looked nervous and told me that wasn't what he meant, acknowledging that as a university student, I was naturally the most capable. It was good that he finally acknowledged my capability, so I stuffed the money back into Zhang Haidai's hand. I asked him then if he was planning to go to the beach tomorrow. He seemed confused, wondering why anyone would go to the beach just to get tired, especially since he felt the villagers would laugh their heads off at someone like him trying to forage. I explained that now that I was back, I planned to build my future within our village. I had gone to the beach today, and I intended to go again tomorrow, but I still needed a helper. Hearing this, Haidai immediately patted his chest and guaranteed that I didn't need to worry. He claimed to have plenty of strength and endless energy, telling me to just give him the word. His sudden change of heart amused me, and I teased him about whether he was suddenly no longer afraid of being tired. He played it off, joking that if he had said he was tired, he must have simply misspoken. I was truly starting to be convinced by his loyalty, so I asked if he was still planning to go off and fight. He shook his head vigorously, stating that since he had serious work to do now, there was no reason to fight. He was too embarrassed to admit it to me, but I knew that when he was released from prison, he had genuinely wanted to find a good job. However, this island is small, a few inquiries and everyone would know his history. Good jobs weren't going to be available to him. Even if he tried to sell his labor on a boat or at the pier, the owners would look down on him as unlucky. Before he knew it, he had started idling his days away again. To him, following me was better than wasting away with nothing to do. I knew his nature wasn't bad. If his parents had treated him with even a little bit of kindness, he wouldn't have turned out this way. I told him we should be clear between brothers, and asked if he wanted a flat salary or a share of the catch. Haidai understood that foraging usually didn't earn much, maybe a few tens of yuan a day, and he didn't want me to lose money by paying him a fixed wage. He insisted that a 1/10 share was enough. If I earned 20 yuan, he would get 2, which was fine by him, as long as he wasn't wasting his days. I agreed to the 1/10 split, feeling I was being quite generous to my brother. I then asked about his family's motorcycle, noting we should use it to get to town more conveniently. I remembered that his parents had bought that bike after he went to prison, using the settlement money from the other families. They had bought many nice things with that money, including what was needed for his elder brother's marriage. Eventually, the motorcycle had been handed down to the eldest son. Haidai hesitated for a moment, but since I was the one asking, he didn't hold back. He figured the worst that could happen was a beating from his parents and brother when he returned. He secretly rolled the bike out while his family wasn't paying attention, and soon I was driving with him sitting behind me. I told him that if his family asked, he should just say I was paying him a salary of 80 yuan a day. He seemed to think I was just trying to save face, and agreed to tell everyone that was the daily rate. I nodded in satisfaction, and half an hour later, we arrived in town. My first stop was the fishing tackle shop, to get some professional gear. The tools at home were rusty relics that weren't fit for use. I started by looking at pliers, which are essential on rocky beaches. The shop only had eel pliers, but they worked just as well for catching octopus. I picked up 2 straight-mouthed and 2 curved-mouthed ones. Even after bargaining, the 4 pairs cost me 150 yuan. I also grabbed 2 pairs of high-top rain boots and a dozen pairs of seafood gathering gloves. These professional gloves are non-slip and puncture resistant, but since they are consumables, I bought extra. I also picked up 2 sets of sun protective clothing. When you're out in the sun all day, your arms need protection just as much as your face. Otherwise, the coastal sun will leave you with a permanent, awkward tan. For night foraging, I bought a headlamp so my hands would remain free. Next, I picked out a short-handled iron shovel and an iron rake, which are lighter and less likely to damage the seafood. I added a long-handled shovel to the pile as well. It's heavier, but it saves a lot of effort in the long run. Seeing my pile of items, the boss tried to upsell me on some new ground cages. When I hesitated, he pointed out that even during the fishing ban I could use them in the reservoir or the river. While Jiahua Island is an exception with its abundant freshwater resources, the river and reservoir are quite far from my house. I didn't want to overextend myself, but the boss was persistent, so I bought 6 small cages and a large can of bait just in case. As I was leaving, a long object in the corner that looked like a water gun caught my eye. I asked the boss what it was, and he got excited. Apparently, the locals were slow to accept new technology, and the item had been sitting there for days. He explained it was a shrimp pump. You just aim it at an air hole and pump the catch out. He guaranteed it worked for mantis shrimp and sea worms too. I loved the idea immediately. It was much better than digging by hand. I asked if it would damage the catch, remembering the old snares we used as kids that were so hard to control. The boss shook his head, promising it was efficient and kept everything lively. I asked if it came with a manual, which seemed to stun him since most people around here don't bother with such things. He found it for me, and after reading it, I realized this was a divine tool for foraging. I hadn't realized how much the technology had improved while I was away. He told me the lowest price was 80 yuan each, and even after I pointed out how much I was buying, he wouldn't budge. He had originally wanted 200 for them, so he was already desperate to move the stock. I gritted my teeth and bought 2. Haidai suggested getting some landing nets, so I added 2 of those for 10 yuan each. By the time I finished, I had spent 1,600 of my 2,500 yuan. Walking out, I noticed a small closed shop next door with a sign saying they bought seafood. I saved the number but didn't call yet. As we passed a new restaurant, I saw a van unloading goods while the boss lady recorded the accounts. Haidai couldn't stop staring at her. She looked to be in her late 20s, with a shapely figure and a charming air about her. I chuckled and asked if she was his type, but he turned red and shook his head vigorously. He muttered that a convict like him didn't deserve a woman's affection, and that he'd only end up harming her. He then asked me if I had really broken up with Ye Tiantian. I told him I had. He looked surprised because he knew how much I liked her, and assumed we would marry. I told him that once it's over, and there's no need to dwell on the reasons. I had to pull him along because he was still staring at the boss lady, and I was afraid she'd think he was a pervert. I still had a lot to buy. At the local supermarket, I picked up daily necessities and headed to the toy section, where I bought 2 Barbie dolls. At the counter, I grabbed a pack of Licha and cigarettes and tossed them to Haidai. He was thrilled, realizing I had remembered his favorite brand. I told him to make do with those for now, and promised better ones later. He insisted these were already great, as he usually smoked much cheaper ones. He clearly thought I was being too optimistic about making money from foraging, but he was a good brother and wouldn't discourage me. I also bought plenty of vegetables at the supermarket entrance, including some snails from the reservoir. The water there is excellent, so they taste much better than the ones from muddy ponds. These were all homegrown, natural, and fresh. By the time I was done, every bit of the money I earned from the mantis shrimp was gone. Haidai was terrified by how fast I spent it. He offered me his money, but I told him that was still his uncle's money and that we would earn our own once the tide receded tomorrow. When we reached a gas station, I stopped the motorcycle and asked him for 100 yuan. He gave it to me without a second thought. I told the attendant to fill the tank, which only cost 12 yuan. I handed the remaining 88 back to Haidai. I explained that we wouldn't always be borrowing his uncle's bike, and since we had it, we shouldn't return it empty. Haydai didn't say anything, but he knew I was looking out for him. As we got close to my house, I saw my sister Jiang Feng approaching again. I pulled the motorcycle to a halt and had Zhang Haidai help me carry our new supplies into the house before telling him to head back home. As his silhouette faded into the distance, I turned to find my sister standing there, her eyes fixed on his retreating back. I knew what she was thinking. Haidai had a criminal record, and she was clearly worried he might lead me astray. But then, she seemed to check herself, remembering that I was a grown man and a university graduate. She looked like she was deciding to trust my judgment, understanding that a prison sentence doesn't strip a person of the chance to reform. She told me she had brought over a sleeping mat and some mosquito coils. She knew the state of this house better than anyone, and the old mat was long past its prime. She mentioned that with the weather being so hot, laying a mat over the padded quilt would make for a much more comfortable sleep. I knew that skipping the quilt entirely would technically be cooler, but the wooden bed frame was far too hard for my liking. I'd always preferred the compromise of the mat on top of the padding. I hadn't even thought about the mosquitoes yet, so the coils were a godsend. I reached into my pile of new purchases and pulled out the 2 Barbie dolls, telling her they were from my nieces. For a moment she looked like she might cry. It hit her then how much I had grown. It used to be her providing for me, but now I was the one bringing gifts for her children. She happily accepted them even as she scolded me for spending so much money. I could tell she was just saying one thing while meaning another, her pride shining through. When she left, I tried to settle in, but I found the old TV wouldn't even turn on. The tape recorder still worked, but I wasn't in the mood for cassettes, and the radio didn't interest me either. I ended up just scrolling on my phone with the electric fan humming nearby. It wasn't as stifling here as it was in the big cities, and when the sea breeze picked up, I didn't even need the fan. I just opened the window and let the air do the work. The only real frustration was the poor signal. Trying to stream videos was a choppy, lagging nightmare. I must have drifted off because when I woke up, I felt a bit disoriented. The first thing I did was check the tide app. The elders around here can calculate the tides in their heads, but I never learned that skill. Thankfully, the internet made it easy. The app showed 2 tides for the day, one early in the morning from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., which I had already missed, and another from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. It made me wonder, if I was really going to do this for a living, would I eventually have to drag myself out of bed in the middle of the night for those early shifts? I thought about it for a few minutes before deciding to just let nature take its course for now. Since there are no breakfast shops or restaurants in a village this small, I had a simple meal at home. Haydai showed up around 3 p.m. for an early lunch before our afternoon expedition. He took over the cooking and proved to be much better at it than I am. The snails we bought were fresh and delicious, and I found myself eating an extra bowl of rice. It was honestly better than anything I'd had in the city. We packed our tools and headed out, bringing along old-fashioned military canteens to stay hydrated under the sun. We returned to the same muddy beach from yesterday, but the scene had changed. Usually, during a small tide, the mudflats were deserted. Perhaps my success yesterday had sparked something, because today the beach was dotted with villagers. Bucktooth Aunt, Aunt Lee, and Jinju Aunt were all out there, alongside Uncle Lue and Old Zhang. Haidai was baffled, noting that he had never seen a small tide look so lively, especially since today's tide was particularly weak. It made sense for kids like Wang Xiaobao and Li Xiao to be out playing, but seeing the adults so active was a surprise. I was equally speechless, but I couldn't blame them. No one turns down a chance to make money. Most people left in the village with the elderly and children, and while they relied on money sent from relatives working elsewhere, the chance to earn something themselves was too good to pass up. A small tide being empty is only true compared to a big one. As long as you're diligent, you can still find things. These elders had years of experience, and I could see a few had already snagged some mantis shrimp, though they were small and lacked the zebra stripes of the valuable ones. Haidai looked at me, waiting for a lead. I scanned the area. My range was now a much more helpful 50 feet, and pointed to a spot not far ahead, asking him if he saw the water spitting from the mud. Haidai's eyesight was naturally good, but even he had to rub his eyes and look closely before he saw the spout. I handed him one of the shrimp pumps we bought yesterday and told him to dig there. While he went to work, I headed toward a less crowded area. Finally, I stopped at a spot where my system revealed a zebra mantis shrimp hidden beneath the surface. Behind me, I could hear the villagers surrounding Haidai. I knew they would. The spot I gave him was a cluster for mantis shrimp. I gripped my own shrimp pump, spat into my palm for a better grip, and took aim. The first try came up empty, but on the second pull, I drew up a zebra mantis shrimp along with the muddy water. In the same area, I managed to snag another. Both were impressive, weighing over 8 ounces. I shifted my focus to pumping for ordinary shrimp next. The shop owner hadn't lied. This pump was incredibly efficient and far gentler than the old rope snares. It wasn't long before the villagers abandoned Haidai and swarmed around my bucket instead. They had been searching for a while and found nothing but worthless scraps. Yet here I was with a bucket full of large mantis shrimp and 2 zebra varieties. They all knew about my sale yesterday, and while Jiang or Mao hadn't revealed the exact price he paid me, they knew it was a lot. They asked how my luck could be so good, half joking that university students must gather seafood better than everyone else. I just smiled and told them it was nothing but luck. Since they were firm believers in fate, they accepted that answer easily. It had to be frustrating for them. Despite their decades of experience and ability to spot every air hole, they were mostly digging up common clams. At Zhang Mao's place, those clams only fetched about 20 cents a pound. At that rate, they'd be lucky to make a few yuan before high tide, barely enough to buy pain patches for the backaches they'd have tomorrow. Heidai was equally stunned. He had taken my talk of getting rich with a grain of salt, but now he was seeing the results. He realized that every waterspout I pointed out actually led to a catch, and the shrimp pump made the work effortless. The villagers were fascinated by the tool, asking where I got it. I told them the shop in town had them, though I warned I didn't know if they would restock. Bucktooth Aunt seemed to regret ignoring the owner's attempt to sell her one before, and the ladies began discussing a trip to town to buy their own divine tools. Just then, my scan picked up something large and beautiful. I realized it was a moon clam. The shrimp pump struggled with its shape, so I switched to my sand shovel and dug it out after a few careful scoops. Uncle Luo looked at me in disbelief, asking if that was really a moon clam. I tossed it into the bucket and confirmed it. While they weren't quite as pricey as zebra mantis shrimp, they were heavy. One that size meant just 4 or 5 would make a pound. Digging up a few of those was a massive profit. I could see Uncle Luo having a hard time catching his breath. We were both digging in the same mud, yet I was pulling up moon clams while he was stuck with common clams. Zhang Mao didn't seem shocked that I had dug up moon clams, but his expression shifted when he saw just how many I had managed to gather during a single low tide. Anyone looking at the haul would have assumed I'd stumbled onto a professional moon clam farm. He picked one up, inspecting it closely before confirming it was indeed a wild specimen. My luck was simply incredible in his eyes. Only yesterday, I had delivered 5 top-grade zebra mantis shrimps, and today I was back with an even larger bounty of clams. In the other bucket, he found 2 more zebra mantis shrimps. He weighed them one by one, calling out 8.3 ounces and 9.1 ounces. Both were well over a half pound. He then moved on to the ordinary mantis shrimps. After accounting for the bucket and the seawater, they totaled 13.2 pounds. The moon clams were the real surprise, however, tipping the scales at a staggering 38.5 pounds. He told me he would buy the mantis shrimps at the same rate as yesterday, and because the moon clams were so large, he offered me 90 yuan per pound. Zhang Mao wasn't much for using the calculator on his phone, so he pulled out an old-fashioned one and started tapping away noisily. Finally, the device announced the total, 4,452 yuan. Zhang Haidai stood there, completely stunned by the figure. Even though he didn't sell goods himself, he was more plugged into the local gossip than the village elders. He knew Zhang Mao had a reputation for being an old fox who would drive prices down whenever he got the chance, but the offer today was undeniably fair. He glanced at me with newfound respect. It was clear that even someone as crafty as Mao didn't dare to play games with me. When Mao asked if I wanted cash or a mobile transfer, I opted for the transfer, just like the day before. He was surprisingly up to date with technology compared to the other seniors in the village, who still insisted on paper bills. A minute later, the 4,452 yuan hit my account. Right on cue, the system chimed in my head, noting that I had earned 4,452 yuan and gained an equal amount of system points. It asked if I wanted to exchange them for scanning range, but I didn't even bother answering. Based on my last experience, my choice was irrelevant anyway. The system defaulted to the exchange, deducting 2,500 points to grant me an additional 16 feet of scanning range. I now possessed a 65-foot radius of vision. With 1952 points remaining, the system informed me I needed 548 more to reach the next upgrade. I remained speechless, knowing my opinion didn't carry any weight, but at least I understood the mechanics now. I needed a full 2,500 points for every 5-meter increase. Anything less would just sit in storage. I immediately transferred 450 yuan to Zhang Haidai. He stared at the notification, looking dazed. When he had agreed to a 1/10 share, he probably thought he'd be making 2 or 3 yuan a day. He never imagined the number would reach triple digits. He looked at me, asking if it was too much, clearly overwhelmed by the idea of earning that much in a single afternoon. I just patted his shoulder and told him I was rounding it up for him, reassuring him that it was fine to accept it. I reminded him that I planned to go out again tomorrow and suggested he use the money to pay back his uncle. He nodded, his mouth hanging open slightly. With this much cash, he didn't need to rely on his uncle's loan anymore, though he noted his uncle was at least better to him than his parents were. Remembering the Barbie dolls I'd bought for my nieces, he decided he should probably pick up some fruit for his uncle as a gesture of thanks. Once we went our separate ways, I realized I still had 4,000 yen left after paying Haidai. Looking around my old dilapidated house, I knew I couldn't just leave it like this. If I was going to stay in my hometown, I needed to make my living space comfortable, but that required a real budget. I also knew I needed my own boat. The fishing ban wouldn't end until September 16th, which left me with about 2 months. Given the changeable island weather and the risk of typhoons, I couldn't count on a steady income every day. Even if I averaged 2,000 yuan a day, I'd only have about 120,000 yuan by the end of the ban. I checked online for boat prices, but the answers were all over the place. I figured I'd have to visit a boatyard near the coastal port to see for myself. No one in the village really owned the kind of boat I wanted, and I doubted they'd sell anyway. I also thought about the crab traps I'd bought. I couldn't use them yet, and I'd have to check with the village committee later about regional restrictions. For now, my scanning system made foraging incredibly efficient, whereas traps were mostly down to luck. It was hard to say which would be more profitable in the long run. When I woke up the next morning, I found my class group chat had completely exploded with nearly 1,000 messages overnight. Hu Danzhen was complaining about being abused at her family's own company, where she'd been forced to start as a lowly clerk under a supervisor who didn't know her identity. Liu Bohong was equally miserable, describing himself as a wage slave working a brutal 996 schedule. Hu Danzhen lamented about wanting to find a small island to live a leisurely life in the sun. And eventually, Liu Bohong tagged me, asking what I was up to since I'd been quiet for so long. Liu Bohong was like me, no family background and stuck with a difficult major, but he had chosen to struggle in the big city. I pushed open my wooden window, took a photo of the morning sea, and sent it to the group. The chat went wild again. When they realized I was back home on a small island, the envy was palpable. Hu Danzhen joked about the old story of the rich man and the fisherman, noting that while the rich man worked to eventually rest by the sea, I was already doing it. I just smiled at their faint mockery. My house was old, sure, but I had a room with a view that people in the city would pay a fortune for. If I could just upgrade the place and build a luxurious villa, I'd have the dream life. But first, I needed a water heater and a washing machine. As I opened my front door to head to town, Zhang Haidai practically collapsed into the house. I jumped back startled, but he sprang up like a monkey a second later. I kicked him out of pure reflex, shouting that he'd nearly scared me to death. He clutched his rear, asking why I'd kicked him, but I just pointed out that collapsing at my door made him look like a corpse or a zombie. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and asked if he'd spent the night hunting mice. He rubbed his eyes and insisted he was fine, but I could tell something was wrong. In reality, his mother had scolded him again, complaining about worn tires despite him filling the bike with gas. She'd even asked why he hadn't just died in prison. He'd wanted to throw his earnings in her face to show he was capable, but remembering my advice, he held back and only mentioned I was paying him 80 yuan. She'd then insulted me, saying that amount was for beggars, since everyone knew I'd found a big haul. He'd finally argued back, threw down the 80 yuan she demanded, and left. With nowhere else to go, he'd ended up falling asleep at my doorstep. I told him we were going to town because I wanted to spend some of the money I'd finally made. He led me to the Hao Lai Wang restaurant, which was the best place in town. When we saw the boss lady, I remembered how he'd stared at her the day before. It was busy, and she was working hard enough to break a sweat. Her thin shirt clung to her, highlighting her figure. And when I looked over at Haidai, he looked like he was about to have a nosebleed. I pulled Zhang Haidai along as we scanned the room, but seeing that there were no open seats made the situation a bit inconvenient. I hadn't expected this newly opened restaurant to be doing quite this well, but I wasn't in any rush to leave. Since Haidai was so eager to come here, I decided that even if we had to wait for others to finish eating, we were absolutely having this meal today. The boss lady walked over with a bright smile, leaving a faint scent of cherry blossom perfume in her wake as she greeted Haidai by name. She informed us that there were no seats downstairs and offered to take us to a private room upstairs instead. I was surprised to realize that Zhang Haidai was actually quite familiar with her. I remarked that her restaurant wasn't small at all, considering most places on this island are tiny eateries with only a few tables. Her downstairs space was surprisingly large, and I hadn't expected there to be a second floor. She led us up, modestly saying that she was just getting by here on Jiaohua Island. I found a window seat that offered a great view of the street below, making the atmosphere feel even more comfortable than the ground floor. The boss lady pointed to a QR code on the table and explained that we could scan it to order ourselves, or do it manually if we preferred. I was impressed. This kind of technology is common in the cities, but it was a first for our small island. Haidai, however, seemed to lose his usual fluency. He tensed up, looking so nervous he was practically sweating, and told her he didn't know how to order, asking her to just pick out a few of her best dishes for us. She gave a bright, generous smile and teased that if he said that, she would really just pick anything, even giving him a wink. Haidai's face turned deep red as he stammered that anything was good. After she left, he explained to me that he had been her very first customer on opening day, and had even helped her move some goods. He scratched his head uncomfortably, admitting that back when he had no proper work, he came here every other day for egg fried rice until they became familiar. I looked at him in shock, questioning why he would go to a seafood restaurant just for fried rice, but his answer was simple. He didn't have any money back then. It made sense, and I realized the boss lady must be a kind person to let him hang around like that without kicking him out. A moment later, a sweet-looking girl arrived with a baking tray for table 27, serving a sea bass. She had a great figure, though her charm was a more pure, lovely kind of allure compared to her sister's bold presence. When I asked if we were only getting the one fish, she smiled and explained that her sister had prepared 3 dishes and a soup, worried that we wouldn't be able to finish more. She listed the rest of the menu: pickled chili fish skin, which was great with rice, scallion oil clams, and a fresh dried clam and vegetable soup. I felt even more certain that the boss lady was a good person. She hadn't tried to rip us off despite Haydai's open-ended request. If she had brought out a massive lobster, he wouldn't have been able to say a word, but these dishes were reasonably priced and perfectly portioned. I asked the girl if she was the sister, and she confirmed it, noting that people often say they don't look alike. They both had their own distinct charms though. I asked why she was working instead of studying, and she explained she was on summer vacation and just helping out. I told her her sister had arranged everything perfectly, and asked her to pass on our thanks. The food was excellent, which explained the thriving business, and the service was top-notch. They even gave us a small fruit platter on the house. My phone vibrated then, and I saw Lu Bohong tagging me in the class chat again, asking what I was doing. When I told them I was eating, Hu Danzhen immediately wanted to know what was on the menu. My classmates were clearly extraordinarily bored if they were this invested in my lunch. I took a photo of the table, though my hand shook slightly, making the image a bit blurry. Yuhei was incredulous, asking if this was really my lunch. I told them I was at a restaurant with a friend and asked if he was looking down on a poor person's meal. He responded by sending a picture of his own lunch, a simple sandwich and a bottle of yogurt in the middle of a plaza. He cried about how his family's company was short-staffed, so his dad had sent him out to hand out flyers. Hu Danzhen followed suit with a photo of an unappetizing takeout box, lamenting their meager lives while I was living so well. It annoyed me a bit. I was just having a casual meal, yet it turned into a moment for them to reflect on their lives. From this perspective, being a rich second-generation kid didn't seem quite so enviable. When it came time to pay, the boss lady only charged us $150. I planned to head back after that, since the tide wouldn't recede until 8 p.m. and would rise again at midnight. I needed a nap to make sure I had the energy for a night of work. Haidai decided to head to the internet cafe, so we parted ways. I noticed many phone numbers for private drivers posted on the supermarket wall, though they were expensive, charging 30 or 40 yuan for a 10-minute trip. I drove the electric bike back and made sure to charge it before taking my nap. By the time I woke up, the bike was ready. When I went to return it, Aunt Guihua tried to keep me for dinner, but I declined since I preferred something simple. As I was leaving, her little grandson wobbled over and patted my backside. His grandmother was startled, asking what on earth he was doing. The little one explained that she had told him I had good luck, and that he should get close to me to rub some of it off. He rubbed his small hands together as if he were soaking up the fortune right then and there. Aunt Guihua's face turned beet red as she tried to tell me not to listen to him, though she clearly didn't even believe her own denial. I was a bit speechless, but I wasn't going to dwell on it. I just hadn't expected such a strange superstition to exist in the village now. I told Aunt Guihua that it was okay, and mentioned that I was also very mischievous when I was his age. She gave me another awkward smile while the little guy, seemingly dissatisfied, tried to rub off some more luck before she held him down. I quickly left Aunt Guihua's house, but as I was heading out, I ran into Wang Xiaobao and Li Xiaoya. For some reason, I felt like those two little rascals were looking at me with a strange gaze. Just as I was about to rush home, Buck-toothed Aunt walked toward me with a wide, ingratiating smile. She asked if I could give her an old piece of my clothing. Looking at her face full of wrinkles and that pleading expression, I was utterly bewildered, my mind full of questions as I asked what she wanted my old clothes for. I had never heard of her having any special quirks before. She explained that her daughter-in-law's belly hadn't moved yet, so she wanted to take my old clothes and put them under their pillows to soak up some of my good fortune. I was completely stunned. I wasn't some child-granting deity. Moreover, the thought of my old clothes being under their pillows made me feel uneasy about even sleeping at night. I definitely wasn't going to give her my clothes, but I still cut a piece of an old tablecloth for her. She left joyfully, clutching the scrap of fabric. We could go clamming at 8 p.m. tonight, and Zhang Haidai arrived from town at 7:30 p.m., riding a second-hand bicycle he'd gotten from who knows where. My mouth twitched at the sight. This guy was still playing games even now. Fortunately, it didn't delay our trip. When we reached the mudflat, there were even more people than yesterday, and it was already completely dark. Those who had headlamps brought them, while others were shining flashlights around. If an inland person unaware of the situation came here, the sight would be quite frightening. I wondered what these people were thinking. Even if they went clamming with me, I was always the one returning with a full haul while they only got their usual amount. Yet they just wouldn't give up. Zhang Haidai complained, asking if they were trying to snatch our goods. My heart, however, remained calm as I reminded him that this sea belongs to everyone. I didn't have the ability to stop others from clamming. To my surprise, I actually saw two aunts who usually treated the mahjong parlor as their home out on the flats today. I didn't know when it started, but the capable people had all left the village, and those who remained were becoming increasingly lazy. Aside from the very old, some of these aunts were only between 40 and 50 years old. Poor as they were, it didn't prevent them from being lazy. While their husbands worked outside to earn money, they played mahjong in the village and wasted their days. When they ran out of money, they just asked for more, never thinking about earning it themselves. Today's situation was quite rare. I didn't go into the crowd, but that didn't stop them from spotting me. Old Zhang shouted my name, and all the other clam diggers stopped and walked over. Some patted me on the shoulder while others sought to shake my hand. I couldn't stand it anymore, and quickly ran out of the crowd, though fortunately they didn't chase after me. This section of the coastline was very long, so I led Zhang Haidai north to an area where sand and mud combined. Now that my scanning range was 65 feet, scanning was much easier, and the night didn't affect my vision at all. I let out a hiss of surprise, which prompted Haidai to ask what was wrong. I told him it was nothing, as I couldn't exactly tell him I'd found that there was no good stuff underneath today. I wondered if my luck had really been rubbed off. My system allowed me to see things beneath the surface, but it didn't provide a luck bonus. When there was nothing good in an entire area, I naturally couldn't dig up anything worthwhile. I turned my head and glanced at where the villagers were, but they didn't seem to be doing any better. When I passed by earlier, I saw only cheap goods there too. Zhang Haidai reminded me that we'd been walking for a long time. So I sighed and finally, making the best of a bad situation, walked back about 50 feet. I asked him if he had brought the salt bottle. I had thought that with my cheating scanning ability, I wouldn't need something like that. But now things were different. He took 2 large salt bottles from his backpack. If this were a breeding farm, clam diggers would know exactly what they were looking for. But since this was a purely natural area, anything could be encountered. Zhang Haidai had brought a little bit of every kind of equipment, which was why his backpack was so heavy. We each took one of the large bottles, and when he asked if we were going to use them, I just nodded. I held the sand shovel and scraped away the top layer of mud, revealing dense tiny holes underneath. Zhang Haidai looked excited, noting how dense the holes were and wondering if they were razor clams. Many razor clams are found together, so if one is dug up, the others nearby are likely there too. Without thinking, he aimed the tip of the salt bottle at a hole and sprayed.